Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Dr. Aziz Alghashian, who is a lecturer of international relations at Naif Arab University. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on the programme. This is clearly a full red carpet welcome sort of a visit. There's a flyby, there's going to be cannon fire, a gala dinner. What does that tell us, do you think, about the state of relations between Riyadh and Washington?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor to join you again. I think it really speaks to two things. I think it speaks to the strategic depth that both Saudi Arabia and the United States have with each other. I think they realized, notwithstanding the multipolarization of the world that's happening, and even at sometimes the doubt that people may have regarding, I think, the commitments that the United States have, or the United States has, it speaks, I think, to the fact that at the end of the day, both see each other as strategic partners. Now, in this case, there may be a question of elevating this relationship really from a strategic partnership to a strategic alliance. And I think, in my opinion, the pomp and the ceremony is probably something that was reciprocated time and again. I think both characters are, both are huge characters, and both, therefore I think this is something they both see that is very befitting to each other and befitting to the moment in Saudi American relations. I think it's an interesting milestone that they've both reached.
Yeah, and this is really the follow-up, isn't it, to the meeting that happened in May. And in fact, you and I discussed the visit to Riyadh of President Trump. Now, during this visit by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, there are expected to be a series of agreements. And President Trump has already teased the F-35 stealth fighter jets. What are you going to be looking out for?
Well, I think, firstly, I just maybe a few words on why I think it's on how quick this follow-up is. In my opinion, I think for the Saudi ruling elite, they realized that it's best to follow up on some of these deals, on the momentum that was built on the previous meeting in Riyadh as quick as possible, because they want to make sure to get a lot of the deals as they can, or as many deals as they can, over the line. And because they also sense that there's opportunities that they have with Trump that they probably won't have with others, which is basically, and this now leads directly to your question, which is basically, I'm really looking at the nexus of business and tech. For me, I think this is something that I think MBS finds incredibly strategic for them, especially obtaining chips that probably was a bit more difficult to obtain in the previous administration, or maybe in a subsequent administration. The other thing I'm really looking at is what kind of defense relationship are we going to see? Are we going to see an alliance? Are we going to see a consolidation of military relations or not? So I think, Donald Trump mentioned that the F-35s will be sold. It's going to depend what kind of F-35s and what are the prerequisites and the conditions. But the fact that I think he said it will be sold suggests there's momentum, and I think it's too costly to with kind of back down from it. The other thing also is, I think, nuclear energy. And in my opinion, I think that's probably the most sensitive aspect out of all of these things. This is something that I anticipate will reach a particular development in the relationship, or let me say it this way: it will probably shorten the gap, this visit, but I don't think it will reach what Saudis really want, because what the Saudis really want is more flexibility when it comes to enriching uranium and also exporting uranium. So this is something I think that, this meeting, this summit, in my opinion, could be a milestone, a facilitatory step, rather than a culmination of Saudi-American relations. So I think, for me, that's the thing that I'm really looking at most.
Sure. So, I mean, clearly both sides stand to gain. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. I want to ask you about something that's happened since we last spoke, which was the Israeli airstrike on Qatar. And I'm wondering how you think that has shifted the perception of security on the Arabian Peninsula, notably in the minds of people in Riyadh.
Yeah. Well, I have to say there were two things that shifted the notions of security since we last spoke in May. Firstly, the Iran-Israel war. The Iran-Israel war has illustrated the fact that, listen, we've seen the dangers of both states, both Iran and Israel, and what they could do. Not only that, what makes it even far more dangerous, I think, for the GCC and Saudi Arabia in particular also, is the fact that we are basically on the front lines of two other people's wars. And this really makes the situation even more, the security landscape for Saudi to be even more complicated, not even dangerous, but even very, very complicated. So that's one thing, and that really has changed the security perception. But I think your point is right when it comes to the attack on Doha, the Israeli attack on Doha. That has significantly changed the security perception regarding Israel. It is now clear for many people in the region and in Saudi Arabia, and let me just say this, for the youth as well, for Saudi youth, and I'll come to why that is important, for the Saudi youth to say that, listen, the new security threat now is Israel. And look at how astonishing that change was. Once it was a potential ally, now it's all of a sudden the security threat. And I think really Israel really takes, the Netanyahu regime is the one that really takes, is at fault for this, because not only did they say or do these attacks and conduct these attacks on Doha, but they also put a warning out and said, listen, this is to everybody. This is a message to everyone in the region. And so I think this speaks to how far there is of an understanding between Saudi Arabia and Israel when it comes to matters of security. Because a lot of the times people say, well, they're actually joined in the hip. And that's complete nonsense. There's a great deal of insecurity in between that relationship, in between Israel and the region. So the security threat in the region, the security perception has significantly changed. And this is something that makes the notion of normalization even more unlikely.
Right, because, Saudi Arabia has been pretty clear that, normalization is not going to happen yet. And I'm wondering why you think not yet.
Well, for, I think, three reasons. In my opinion, firstly, I would say the domestic public opinion in Saudi. It's domestic public opinion in Saudi, especially when it comes to the youth, is very, very much hostile towards any notion of normalization. In my opinion, the fact that normalization is treated, quite frankly, as a derogatory term. The term mutabbi' or tatbi' is used as a curse. It's derogatory. That's how bad the situation has become. Moreover, I think the Israeli government has gone time and again to make it very clear that they will not concede anything towards a Palestinian state. And this is to do with their own domestic politics and their own silly season and their own rhetoric towards their own bases. But also on the United States front, in order for Saudi Arabia, based on what the logic of normalization would be when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Israel, Saudi Arabia requires things from the United States, and that requires a treaty. And that treaty requires 67 votes in the Senate. And this means that there has to be a more amicable political landscape in the United States. And that is just not there whatsoever. It's very, very difficult. And next year, we're going to go into midterms, which means that the Democrats will be most likely in control of the Senate. And so I think the whole political dynamics is just very difficult. The last point is the following. I think the fact that Israel has been going on striking at will what it wanted suggests that if there is any discussions of normalization, it's bullied into normalization. It's from a point of vulnerability rather than a point of weakness. And that's something that no one could afford to even talk about. So just the environment is not there. And I will just say this way, for normalization to happen, loads of stars need to be aligned. And now some of these stars are not even in the same galaxy. So it's just very difficult to see normalization happening in the near future.
Just changing the subject slightly and moving away from the issue of normalization of ties with Israel. I was just reading one Saudi commentator. I don't know if you're aware of his work, Abdulrahman al-Rashid. He writes in the Saudi daily Al-Sharq al-Awasat. He said, quote, "It's not an exaggeration to say that the success of Saudi-American relations will have a big impact on the region's stability and prosperity." Do you agree with that? And why do you think this relationship is so pivotal to the whole region's prosperity?
Well, I think it comes to the notion of Saudi Arabia's size, its sheer size. And, other countries have visions, and other countries have also projects, and they're no less important. But, Saudi Arabia is the biggest country in the region. And as a result, its survivability and its prosperity has more resonance and has more reverberations than probably other countries would. As a Saudi, I don't like to enter into this whole size game because, countries, it's not about the size. It's about, the will, and it's about kind of, more than that. It's about, efficiency, etc. But what I will say is that in this case, size does matter. And so when a country like the United States is investing in Saudi Arabia, and when you have the international superpower, albeit competing superpower, with a regional superpower, this is now important for, I think, the security of the region, because I think the security of the region now is more interconnected to international security. And so it really is a web of an interconnectivity of real security, international security, and a convergence of international security and regional security with also national security. So it really is, a lot has to do with the size, a lot has to do with really the region and the role and the function that it's playing in an ever multipolarizing world, and in a multipolarizing region that many poles around the world are competing towards or competing in, and also competing with. And so stability is of the essence. And the last point I would say about this is we're beginning to see prosperity and security become very overlapped. This is something that hasn't been there in the region before. At times, I think the security rhetoric and the economic rhetoric were probably, you could see daylight between them. Now, I think it's just inextricably tied. And therefore, prosperity must have security, and vice versa.
Yeah, and just while we're talking about prosperity and the Saudi economy, it's changed immeasurably as an economy over the last decade. I'd just like to ask you, as a Saudi, why is this change necessary, and what's the most significant change, economically speaking, that you've witnessed during the course of the last decade?
Well, for me, in the last decade, half of that decade, I was abroad. I was living in the UK, and even probably a decade before that even. But, so I spent a great deal of time outside Saudi. And every time I visited, every few months, you could see a change happening. And it's very interesting to see, because there was an uptick in this change. Now, I think you could see the change even when you're in Saudi. For me, I think just the exposure and the fact that I think many people that visit Saudi, even people that I never thought would visit Saudi, are visiting Saudi. And this is due to the openness, I think, of Saudi. This is due to a lot of the festivals and a lot of the things that probably the previous generation in Saudi probably did not pay too much attention to, or maybe undermined the impact of that. But these are machines, vehicles of trying to make sure Saudi Arabia is opening up, and actually, bringing in a great deal of people from abroad to Saudi Arabia. So I think for me personally, the exposure that Saudi Arabia has, and the fact that the tourism that I see, for me is very interesting, and the ease of which people could go into Saudi now. Time and again, people are saying, I'd love to go to Saudi. And before I'd say, yeah, you could come to Saudi. And I was like, in my mind, I'm saying, good luck. Try to find the paperwork that you need. Now, this is this is less of an obstacle. And so personally, amongst other things, this is the thing that stood out the most.
Right, and what you're saying makes me think about the talks in Washington. We've got that forum, that US-Saudi business forum tomorrow. I mean, this diversification of the Saudi economy surely means great opportunities for US investors.
Absolutely. And not only this, in my opinion, I think it's one thing to have, investors say Saudi is open for business. It's another thing, in my opinion, that American investors say it is open for business. And that's just the reality, and that's clear. And this is something that I, recently wrote about and said this, how Saudi views the United States. And I think the way I put it was it viewed it in an asymmetric multipolar world. And what I meant by that was that, yes, there are options out there, but it still seems to view the United States as its main preference. And so, the United States is the biggest economy still. As the saying goes, if they sneeze, everybody else catches a cold. And I think, notwithstanding the fact that there are options and the landscape is changing and there are, diversification, there seems to be something far more prominent when it's investment from the United States. And I think this is something that not only is it just because of the tech and know-how, but this is a result also of a great deal of investment in soft power in the decades prior. So we're seeing a continuation of how previous policies of scholarships, of cooperation, of students mostly going to the United States, coming back to Saudi Arabia, and bringing with them kind of a different worldview. And I have to say, as someone who was, brought up here, in the late 90s and early 2000s, I could see how a great deal of Saudi society has evolved in their worldview. They've become more worldly. Okay, there's still many aspects and pockets of conservatism here and there. This also has to be part of the story. But there is a contingency that is different. And I think that makes the economic cooperation, the tech cooperation, I think it makes it easier to gel more.
Sure, and yeah, and that tech really ties in as well with the fact we're talking here, aren't we, about a very young population. I haven't got the figure in front of me. I think it's 70%, that's right, 70% of the Saudi population under the age of 35. And there it is with a leader who's in Washington who is only just 40. I'm talking, of course, about Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So that's all very coherent. I just want to ask you lastly, I mean, obviously, we're talking today about Saudi-US relations, but there are other powers out there. There are other superpowers out there, China, Russia. Can Saudi have three friends in the form of the United States, Russia, China, or does it have to choose?
It's a very important question, and it's a question that is always asked, and it's been being asked for decades. Saudi certainly doesn't have to choose, but Saudi probably previously needed to choose. And that was just not because of Saudi. I think that was just the result of the international landscape. Now things have changed, and the international landscape has changed. And I think this is not only the opportunity, but for me, I think it's also the challenge that Saudi has now. The challenge to really begin to manage this diversification. And I think so far they are doing this. They are managing this, but I think there is room to improve, quite frankly. I think there's aspects of trying to manage this diversification. And one of them, for me, in my opinion, is obtaining an alliance in the United States. Why? Because I think seeking an alliance in the United States speaks to some of the anxieties that people have inside Washington, D.C. by saying, listen, you may be going abroad or you may be going out elsewhere. And in fact, I think the timing is very interesting because the Saudi Arabia the Saudi ruling elite choosing to seek an alliance when there is universal doubt of American reliability says, listen, we're still choosing you. And we're still trying to, you are our preference. We still want to work with you first, but first doesn't mean only. And I think there are also structural issues in the United States that lead to delays, for example, military procurement. And so right now, if there is military delays or military procurement delays or whatever kind of delays or bureaucracy or complications inside Washington, D.C. for anything, Saudis already have a great deal of options. So for Saudi, I think they've positioned themselves in a win-win situation. And this is part of the whole balancing act that they need to do it. In my opinion, I think they just need to, we all need to be more, I think, proactive on the discursive aspect by saying, that it is a win-win situation. And we all, our lens is a win-win situation, not really a zero-sum situation.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time, but really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Always a pleasure. Dr. Aziz Alghashian, a lecturer of international relations at Naif Arabiya University. Thank you very much indeed for your time.